Hello, everyone, and thank you for taking some time out of your schedule today for our physical inventory year-end process in Dynamics 365 Business Central webinar. My name is Tess, and I'm the facilitator today. Before I pass it over to our presenter, I want to remind you that if you have any questions during the webinar, please type them into the questions area in the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen, and we'll answer the questions at the end of the presentation. The session will be recorded and will be posted on our blog. Now, I would like to introduce you to our presenter today, Will Haber, who is a solution specialist on our Dynamics 365 Business Central team here at Encore. So, Will, over to you.
Thanks, Tess. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, depending on where you are. So I will start off by introducing myself. I'm Will Haber. I've done about 4 to 5 years now of a solution specialist in terms of the NAV and also D365 Business Central space. And today we're going to go over mainly the physical inventory year-end processes, what that entails, as well as other different tips and tricks with items and inventory adjustments, both in a basic warehousing configuration and an advanced warehousing configuration. So just kind of showing you the different examples of like when you have locations and bins set up versus when you just have standard inventory set up within the system. So in order to get started, I'm just going to go through my agenda here. So today we're going to cover the physical inventory process. So basically the whole process and what it entails from a basic warehousing configuration standpoint. We're going to go through calculating the inventory within the physical inventory journal, as well as printing out the count sheets. There's a few different ways you can do this. You can also enter and post the inventory counts once you're validating the counts, once you've validated the numbers in terms of what's in your warehouse or location. You can post the inventory counts that way. So then I'm going to go through the differences between the advanced and the basic process within the system. So that's what I'm going to cover in the advanced portion of it. We're also going to go through cycle counting. So in terms of the year-end process, that's pretty much the first 5 slides in the agenda or the year-end process, but and number 8 in a sense. But number 6, 7, and 9 are more just different processes you do throughout a yearly basis to manage your inventory. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. So within the physical inventory process, we have a few different basic warehousing configuration tactics and different steps to actually calculate the inventory and post the actual adjustments. So we're going to go through calculating the inventory of what the system has actually on hand versus what your physical inventory, what you actually physically have in the warehouse, and just kind of show you that process of how you can generate the system quantities first and then validate that against what you have in the warehouse. We're also going to show you how to print the count sheet. So with the count sheets, there's 2 different reports that you can use. There's one main report that we see typically used by most clients to print the count sheets. And then once you're done validating the count sheets and have counted the entire inventory in the year-end count process, you can go ahead and record and post the actual inventory and see what the flow is in terms of the actual historical transactions of it. Just a quick note here, these process steps only really apply to a location that's not using directed pick and put away. So if you don't have any warehouse location, if you don't have any zones or bins within your warehouse, this would apply to that process there. And then we'll go through the advanced process as well, where it is directed pick and put away. So within the basic warehouse configuration, I'm just going to go into my demo tenant here and go over to this tenant. And essentially within this tenant, we have a few different processes here. So as you can see within this tenant, this is also basic and advanced warehousing. So if we go search for physical inventory journals, and we're going to conduct a count now. So essentially, this is the physical inventory journal. It has a few different setups in terms of quantity, a few different fields to point out in terms of the different calculations of inventory. So the quantity calculated field is the field we're going to focus on as the first part to actually generate the system quantities. So this is going to be for basic inventory. When you pull up your list, it's going to calculate all the system quantities per item and per location. And then the physical inventory field is the user editable field where you would actually enter what you have in your warehouse physically. And then from there, it would essentially generate. So for example, if I had, when I calculate the inventory, you'll see this, but in terms of this process here, if I have this line here and I use this location code, right now there's nothing quantity calculated. But if I use a physical inventory of let's say I find 3 in the warehouse, I can do that. And essentially, so it's probably easier to show you through the actual process here. But essentially, it's going to basically show a positive or a negative adjustment depending on if I have more or less in the warehouse. So let me go ahead and run the calculate inventory. So in order to run calculate inventory, you would go to action, function, and calculate inventory, or you can also go through the prepare and calculate inventory as well. So essentially, this is the calculate inventory report. And then so essentially the different processes here, this is going to default to your work date, your posting date. So whatever your current work date is on your user settings. And then the document number is going to default from the batch. Items not on inventory. If you want to include any items that are not currently, that have an inventory of 0 in your count, you can do that as well. And typically we see most clients doing this because you want to validate if you actually have the item or not, regardless of whether the system has the inventory calculated or recorded. Including items without transactions. So essentially what this means is any items that don't have any ledger history or sub-ledger history will also be included in the report. So I'm going to select both of these just to get a full inventory list per location of what we have. You can also filter it per location and per item as well. I'm going to go ahead and run this. So currently, this is what we have in inventory, what you're looking at in terms of the items per location. So just to kind of analyze this and really see what line by line we're looking at. For this item, for example, if we filter down to it, we can see we have 4 in unidentified locations, so just 4 items in inventory. And then we also have 1 in the east location and 2 in the main location. So in order to essentially see the positive adjustments and negative adjustments, let's say we don't have actually anything in an unidentified location, we put everything away. So we're going to negatively adjust this back to 4. So for a quantity of 4. So essentially it's the difference. Your quantity is the difference between what the system generates and what the physical inventory is recorded as. Let's say we have more in the east location. This would be a positive adjustment of 2. And then for this, we counted the accurate inventory in the main location. So it would post essentially a positive adjustment of 0, but it wouldn't record anything on the quantity adjustment for the unit amount. So that's kind of the way how you can calculate inventory. So essentially that's the calculate inventory process there. Now, in terms of generating the count sheet, I'm going to actually go ahead and record some adjustments here. So let's say, for example, we found 7 here, 4 here, and just kind of going down the list. Just going through the list here. Let's say we found nothing here. I have all the negatives. So just making a few adjustments here. Bear with me a minute. And so you can kind of see the process here. Like essentially, you can do this on a one-by-one level, or you can actually import the journal as well. There's another way you can actually do this to manually or to automatically upload your count sheets by going to open in Excel. So typically we see most clients export this to Excel and then re-import them. So that is an option there to upload your physical counts at that point. To actually upload the counts to post the adjustments. So essentially with the calculate inventory, now we're going to go ahead and print our count sheets here. So in order to print your count sheets, there's two different reports. There's the physical inventory list, and there's the physical inventory count report. So the count report is used more in an advanced warehousing configuration where you have, you want to generate the shelf and the bin that the item is located in. So if you have shelves and bins set up for your different inventory items, that's where you would generate that report. Otherwise, you would generate the post and print report and go to print. And so that's your physical inventory list report. So going to your physical inventory list report, you have a couple options here. So you can show the serial or lot number if you have item tracking with your actual inventory. You can also show this quantity calculated as well. I'm going to go ahead and show the quantity calculated, show the system quantity. Some customers actually do not show this and have this disabled by default because they don't want their warehouse employees to see what their system quantities are to validate against. So it's more of a blind count in that scenario. So that would be that example there where you would leave this disabled to have a blind count. So I'm going to go ahead and preview this, or actually print this in this case. So as we can see, we have a few different quantity calculators here. And this is where you can record your counts essentially in the physical warehouse. These are your count sheets in a sense. So with the count sheets, it'll show the quantity calculated. It'll show bin codes if you have advanced warehousing set up. It'll also show different location codes associated with each inventory item and where they're located. So that's an example of the count sheet essentially in that case. So that's essentially the count sheet there. And so now we go print the count sheets. So that's the way to print that in that report. Now, in order to actually enter and post the inventory, as I mentioned previously, there's two different ways to do this. You can update it manually line by line once you have the counts recorded, or you can actually open it in Excel. You can copy the lines in Excel and then re-import them into Business Central. So I'm going to go ahead and update a few more lines here. And as you can see, the system automatically adjusts based on the positive or negative adjustments based on what your count is. So for example, in this case, we found 5 in the warehouse of this Rome guest chair. And so they will record a positive adjustment of 3 to the actual default location. For this case, in terms of the main location, we found 2 less, so it'll record and it'll negatively adjust that inventory in the main location for 2. So that's an example of that. And essentially, if it's the same quantity physical as what the system generated, it'll record a 0 adjustment in the journal entry. So now I'm going to go ahead and show you how to enter and post the inventory. So we've already entered the inventory. You can also do it through Excel automatically. So in order to post the inventory, typically most clients have a post and print option. So essentially you would want to post and print the document or journal of what you're recording in your adjustments. So it gives you a printed report of what is actually about to be posted to the adjustments per item per location. So I'm going to go ahead and post and print this. And so there's a thing to note with inventory and warehousing as well is in order to actually test the report and see if it's going to post through, there's no preview posting action as opposed to the financial aspects of the system. So in order to actually test that, you would go to Actions Posting, and there's a test report you can generate as well. So I'm going to go ahead and generate the test report to see if everything's good to go. So these would be the adjustments that would be recorded essentially in this inventory posting test report. So as you can see, we have the positive adjustments and negative adjustments. By default, it'll be a positive of 0 if there's nothing to actually record. And it records the quantities and invoices the quantities based off of what you're reconciling to your inventory subledger. I'm going to go ahead and actually post the stats and print the report. That's essentially the way you would post the inventory to your inventory subledgers. Let me go ahead and actually change one line here. There's a line that actually uses an in-transit location. Therefore, we can't post anything to an in-transit location. That's another thing to note as well. Let me go ahead and repost this and print the report. And it adjusts the value entries as well when you're posting. The journal lines have been posted, and then it prints out and generates an item register report. So essentially, it only records the quantities that you've posted with a difference. In this case, so this is what's actually posting to the item ledger entries. And there's a separate ledger entry called the physical inventory ledger entries, where that would post as well. So in order to look at the different posted transactions here, what we can do is we can go to actually the GL register. What I can do is I can actually go filter on this. And essentially, this is the register that was posted for these entries. In order to view the related entries here, I can go to Actions and Find Entries here. Actually, I can go to the item ledger from here. So I can go to the general ledger here and just view the related entries of what's actually posted at cost. So these are the different cost postings here from that entry. Alternatively, what I can do is I can go to the item ledger entries to view the inventory effect on the subledger. So I can still sort by posting date. And so essentially, these are all the adjustments that we posted here on 8/9. And essentially, these are just different adjustments here. So, and we can see by document number what we posted essentially. So we can, if we want to look at all the related entries associated with that, we can go to Actions and Find Entries here. And so these were all the actual entries that were related to what we posted. So as I mentioned before, we posted 27 adjustments. The physical inventory ledger entries are for 46. So in the physical inventory ledger entries, it'll actually record the 0 quantity. So if you want to view even further of items that had no differences when you conducted your count in your physical inventory, you can also view all your items that were counted at that point. Another thing is you can see your value entries as well. So what is actually posted in terms of the inventory costing. So as you can see, there's a direct cost of 0 in terms of a lot of these. And then some of them are item ledger entries, positive and negative adjustments. In this case, a direct cost. So that's the value entries. So this is kind of the basic warehousing configuration of how you conduct your physical inventory year end. A few differences with your advanced warehousing configuration here. and kind of how you do that and calculate the inventory on the warehousing side. For advanced warehousing configuration, it's all done through warehouse journals. And the first setup that you have to keep in mind for advanced warehousing configurations is you need to make sure each user that is using the warehouse locations is set up as a warehouse employee for all the locations that are warehouse enabled. So in this case, I've set myself up for all locations, but really in practice, you only really have to set yourself up for all the warehouse enabled locations. And what I mean by that is if I go to the locations here, and I look at all the different locations, for the East location, for example, this is not set up as directed pick and put away, as I mentioned previously. So it's essentially a basic, in terms of the system, it's a location that's not been mandatory and not directed pick and put away. So in this case, with this location, it's not set up with bins or zones. So essentially, this is an example of an inventory location where you would just use it purely for recording your inventory. When you have a more advanced warehousing structure, such as the test warehouse I set up, this would be the difference here when you have the bins mandatory as well as the directed pick and put away. So essentially, this is where you would have you would use the warehouse journals and then record the adjustments in the item journals. Another key setup with the warehousing locations that you need to set up is you need to have an adjustment bin. So when you post your adjustments and synchronize your item ledger with your warehouse ledger, the system is going to look for this adjustment bin code when you're setting it up. You would also want to have a receipt in the shipment bin code, most likely. And if you're doing production or assembly orders, you would also want to have this information populated as well. So this is the locations, and this is kind of all the setups that go into the advanced warehousing and at a high level overview. So in order to actually calculate the inventory in the advanced warehousing, so now that I'm set up as a warehouse employee, what I can do is I can go to warehouse physical inventory journal. And so this, because I'm set up as a warehouse employee, it gives me access to this journal. So essentially, the first step here is very similar to the physical inventory journal. You go to process and calculate inventory here. And so you enter a document number. We'll do WHSC 001. You can also include items that are not in inventory, similar to the physical inventory journal. So where the system hasn't recorded an actual quantity of it and there's zero inventory on it. So I can go ahead and leave that disabled for now. I'm going to go ahead and generate this. So essentially, as you can see, within the calculate inventory for the warehousing process, they separated out into bins. So this location had a zone that I set up, as well as the bins that I set up. So I set up a receiving bin, a shipping bin, and a few different pick and put away bins as well. Just to kind of illustrate that example of a location that would have essentially bin setups throughout the warehouse. So that's an example of how you can calculate the advanced configuration and how you can generate inventory. It's very similar to the process to post the inventory. You would register it. And so if you register this inventory, we're going to come back to this later, but essentially the registering of the inventory. So if I go ahead and I register this inventory here, actually, let me record some quantity differences before I do that. So essentially, it's the same process here where you're recording quantity differences in your bin. So for example, this bin 001 for these items, and for all these different items in that bin, I'm recording quantity differences. So for example, the Berlin guest chair, I found 118. So I'm going to negatively adjust that bin quantity by 5. Conversely, I found 145 of the Atlanta whiteboard in that location, in that bin location. So I can adjust that by 46 of a positive adjustment. And so essentially what we're doing here is we're doing the warehouse adjustments, and then we're going to calculate that in the item journal at the end to synchronize our inventory with our warehouse within our bins. So we have a few less lines here, so I'm going to just go through the example. And I'll leave one line where it's a difference. There's no difference here. So essentially, we have our adjustments recorded here. Similarly, you can automatically do this through the open in Excel function and paste this back into Business Central from there. So that's another way of recording your adjustments. So I'm going to go ahead and register these. So it's different in terms of the posting action here. The posting action is the register in terms of warehousing documents. So I'm going to go ahead and register that and print out the report. So the journal lines have been registered, and then this goes into the warehouse register report, which then generates from there. So similar to the item register, but essentially this is where the adjustment bins. So as you can see, there's different adjusting lines. So the adjustment bin gets debited for 6. It essentially gets decreased by the amount of what you've adjusted into the new bin. So in this case, what I mean by that in terms of that example, if we had a positive adjustment into this bin of 6, it would negatively adjust the adjustment bin by 6 as the offsetting entry, because the inventory has to come from somewhere in terms of the system. So the adjustment bin is essentially the intermediary bin or the offsetting bin in that case. So now that we've registered the inventory in the warehouse register, we're going to come back to that, and we're going to calculate the warehouse adjustment in a journal called the item journal. And so that's essentially where you record your final reconciliations between your inventory subledger, what you've actually have in inventory, and what's in your bins from the warehousing standpoint. So the next step I'm going to go through is the cycle counting. So in terms of your warehouse process, you may want to count things on a periodic basis. And this is where you would use the cycle counting functionality within Business Central. So in order to demonstrate that, we're actually going to go to the items. And so within the items, before I actually go into that, there's one setup that needs to be done. There's something called the physical inventory counting periods that need to be set up. And so these physical inventory counting periods are essentially different frequencies of when you count your items per item. So for example, you could have this on a quarterly basis. You could have this on a once a year basis. You can have this on a half year basis. Whatever your periods are, essentially, you can have them on a fiscal and on a per period basis, essentially. So I could count this 24 times a year, where I do a bi-monthly count. In that case, I can also do a monthly count in this case, or I can do a semi-annual count. So this is kind of just the different examples of how you can set up your counting periods per inventory item. The next step that we need to do is we need to assign this to an item, these counting periods, because without that, the system won't know which items are to be counted and when. So we go to our inventory list here. And essentially within the inventory list, I've already set up a few different items. And so the way you would set this up is you would go down to the warehousing tab, and you would specify this field called the physical inventory counting period code. And so this physical inventory counting period code, when you specify that based on the list of what you've calculated. So for example, we have a high volume frequency here. So what this means is every month or every period in this case, because the fiscal year is 12 months, it's going to calculate into a cycle count essentially. So the last physical inventory date was 8/9. The next counting end date would be 8/31. and then the next counting start date would be 8/1. So we've already counted it this month is what it's telling us in terms of this item. And you would count it on a monthly basis in that case. Similar here, we have a low volume frequency, so this would be counted on a yearly basis. So we would do a yearly cycle count for this item. And you can also view the last physical inventory date. So in the last physical inventory date, we counted that there was a quantity of 2 we adjusted in the positive and 2 negative in the west location. So we did a count on 8/9 for this item. So I'm going to go ahead and set up a few new items because these already have been counted in terms of the yearly process and the cycle counting periodic process. So in order to do that, kind of as mentioned before, you would go down to the warehousing fast tab for this item, let's say. So let's choose another item here. This one does not have a physical inventory counting period code. I'm going to go ahead and assign this. Let's say we counted on a semi-annual basis. So we can do that. And essentially this will count, the next counting start date will be 7/1 and the end date will be 8/31 in this case. So now that we've assigned the items the physical inventory counting period codes, what we can do is we would go to the physical inventory journal. So we would go back to our physical inventory journal here. So within the physical inventory journal, in order to generate a cycle count from this journal, what we would do is we go to prepare and calculate counting period. So what this function does essentially is it takes the items and you can select the items that you want to count based on the counting period set up on the item card. So when we run this function, we can see that the last counting date, we haven't counted anything yet, but we've done physical inventory on it. So we can select the items that we want to include within our cycle count. I'm going to go ahead and edit the list here. And I'm going to go ahead and select all the items. You can select multiples. You can select one item, but I'm going to go ahead and select all of them. And it'll populate the journal with these items in terms of the document number. So essentially, once I go to this calculate physical inventory counting batch job, it'll fill in the lines with a posting date of the work date and then with the next document number in the series. So right now it's filled out all those items and it counts them per location. So this is kind of essentially this is the same process as the physical inventory year end, but now this is on a subset of items that that you want to count based on that period. So I'm going to go ahead and do some adjustments here just to show you the similarity. See if that is no different. So as we can see, we have a few positive and negative adjustments here. So very similar to the physical inventory year end. So in the west location, we found 6. So we're adjusting that by 2, increasing the inventory in that location for this item. So now, similar to the physical inventory year end process, I'm going to go ahead and print this or post and print this report and generate the item register. The journal lines have been posted. And now this will record the register for that cycle count. So as we can tell, if we want to look back on that cycle count, we can look back on that by document number here, PIJ with the leading zeros and then the 2 document here. So essentially, if we want to look back on this physical inventory count, we can go to the item ledger entries similar to before. And we want to analyze what was counted and what was posted as adjustments. We can search by document number here. if we don't see it right away, essentially. So by document number, if you know the physical inventory count, so you always want to record that document number in most cases. So this is our cycle count from this from that list, essentially. So this is the ability to record that cycle count and have the entries associated with it. So similar to the year end, we can look at all the related entries associated with it. So it filters by document number. And the physical inventory ledger entries will be 9 ledger entries because if you remember, we recorded one without a difference. So there's an extra 0 adjustment that we did. And that 0 adjustment actually posts with the unit cost. So that's something to keep in mind as well. See, the amount doesn't post, but it affects your costing. So another thing is within the cycle counting, very similar to the year-end process, and essentially that's the ability to cycle count and perform adjustments. Now, let's say you wanted to adjust an item on the fly, essentially, and you know the adjustment that you want to make. It's just a quick adjustment of inventory. Let's say you got something for a purchase, or you need to positively adjust something quickly. What you can do is you can go to the inventory list. And so there's this function called adjust inventory. And this really works on a per item basis. So what I can do is there's a couple different ways to actually look at this. I believe there's an item adjust inventory here. So this is one way you can get there. Another way you can get there is by selecting the item and right-clicking on it and going to adjust inventory from here. And what this will do, this function, is when I open this up, it'll take me to a page where I can adjust inventory automatically. It pulls up my inventory availability per location. So right now I have nothing 6 in a location without a location, essentially. I have nothing in the east bin. I have 18 in the main bin, and I have nothing in the west bin. So let's say I wanted to adjust this, and let's say I move this to the west bin to do an adjustment. I could do 0 of the inventory here, and then I could do all 6 into the west bin. So I made an adjustment, let's say, on the fly, and this will just recalculate my inventory, essentially. And so now when I look at my quantity on hand, and I look at my remaining quantity, I see that I have 6 in the west bin, and then I have 18 in the main bin. So it essentially did the adjustment for me automatically. And you can do this with multiple locations. And to verify and validate this, really, what you would do is you would go to, there's a view to actually see what you're about to adjust by going to related availability and items by location. This is the same view, essentially, of what your location is. So for this item, let's say, we have 18 in the main bin and 6 in the west bin now, because we performed that adjustment. This is kind of showing you on a high level where my items are by location. So similar to adjusting inventory of multiple items, what you would do in order, if let's say you have multiple items that you want to adjust at one time, you would do this through the item journal. And so the item journal is a very powerful tool within the system. And essentially you can record warehouse adjustments, you can synchronize your warehouse with your item ledger, you can record adjustments, you can record purchases, if you purchased inventory, if you sold inventory. There's a lot of different things you can do with the item journal. And you have to remember in terms of the warehouse item journal, so anything within the system that's a warehousing functionality, whether it's a warehouse journal, a warehouse physical inventory journal, always make sure that your user is set up for that location as a warehouse employee. So that's going to be a key there. So if they're not set up as a warehouse employee, so for example, just to kind of illustrate that example, I remove my access from the warehouse enabled location test warehouse. and I try to access anything related to the warehousing item journals or warehousing functionality, it'll throw an error essentially. The system, it'll say you're not set up as a warehouse employee. So you can set up a location with directed pick and put away and assign it to admin. So this is basically saying that you don't have directed pick and put away locations assigned to that user, and you can't access the warehousing functionality. I'm going to go ahead and add myself back to the employees table. So essentially, to adjust inventory of multiple items in a basic warehouse setup, what you would do is you would just record the inventory. Let's say you had a few different items here and you wanted to do some inventory adjustments. You could do this for this item. Let's do a positive adjustment of 5 on this inventory in the East location. You have to specify a location code as well on the item journal. That's a key as well, because the system wouldn't know where to essentially where to adjust the inventory into and out of. And then let's do a negative adjustment out of the West location. And so in order to record a negative adjustment in the items journal, you would need to do the negative sign. So this is giving me an interesting message here. It's basically saying that I don't have the inventory in the West location. So what I can do is, for this item, I can validate that by going to items by location, or I can decrease the quantity that I want to negatively adjust. In this case, because I know I have 3 or 4 in this location for this item. So this is an example of the negative and positive adjustments here. So you can change this to a negative adjustment. You can actually leave this as a negative. There's 2 different ways to do it essentially. So you can do a negative adjustment of 2, or you can do the -2 essentially positively adjusting it. It's a little confusing, but essentially this means the negative is going to take it out of inventory. The positive is going to put it back into inventory. And then I'll do a purchase here. Let's say we purchased some inventory. And we purchased it for the main location for 10. So as you can see, it records the unit amounts of what the inventory is from the item card, and it records the total amount, which is the quantity times the unit amount. So now in order to post these adjustments, you would go to post. You can also post and print the inventory. You can print the item register of what you're about to post. So I'm just going to go ahead and post this for now. And so now we can view, it's going to have a different document number. So the theme is, when you're looking at the item ledger and item transactional history, you always want to make sure you have that document number of what you posted and have that recorded, because the document number is the key in order to search for the related entries. So in this case, the document number was IJ2. And so I can go to the related entries by going into my actions and find entries here. And so with my actions and find entries, it says that I recorded 3 adjustments, but the GL entries would be the offsetting accounts of 6. So there would be 6 entries recorded to the inventory account for the offsetting balances. And then it also records the value entry. So the value entry is essentially the inventory costing side of it, and it's directly related to the item subledger and the inventory subledger in a sense. So it shows you your value quantity of what you're actually posting, and your cost per unit as well. So that's an example of how you can post an inventory adjustment essentially for multiple things in that sense. Now, going back to the example of the warehousing that we were doing with the advanced warehousing, let's say I registered my warehouse bin quantities, but my item ledger is out of sync with my warehouse entry ledger at the end of the year. In order to reconcile and sync your inventory subledger with what's in your bin content, you would also go to the item journal, and you would run a function called calculate warehouse adjustment. And so that function, essentially, when I go to process, when I go to actions, functions, and calculate warehouse adjustment, what this function is doing is it's gonna pull up a request page, and it's basically gonna calculate all the warehouse adjustments from my warehouse that are out of sync with my item ledger. So this is the request page report here. And so it defaults to my work date. The document number defaults for my lines. You can filter this by location and by number. So if you wanted to record, if you wanted to filter a certain location and you know that's out of sync with your inventory subledger, you can do that here as well with the report filters, or you can run it open-ended. I'm going to go ahead and run it open-ended. And so all of these, this is all from the test location. If you remember, this is all the transactions from the warehouse items journal that we actually posted and registered. These are all the registered components, and this is all the different adjustments from these, all the positive adjustments into inventory, essentially. It's going to reconcile my inventory subledger with what's in my bins currently. And so that's kind of how you synchronize the two ledgers. And this is a key, I can't stress this enough, essentially, because it's in an advanced warehousing configuration. Really, the key is to always have your inventory sync with your warehouse on a periodic basis, because that's going to determine if your inventory is managed in the proper process. So I'm going to go ahead, in order to post the transactions and sync the inventory, the two ledgers together, you would post the journal once you calculate the warehouse adjustment. The journal lines have been posted. We can also go to the item ledger entries to view those posted entries as well, and see that our warehouse entries are actually in sync as well too. So these are the actual test warehouse transactions that we posted. Now, if we go to the warehouse entries, we can see that our warehouse entries are in sync with our inventory subledger. And as you can see, there's different warehousing documents here. So the warehouse 001, and essentially this shows you all your adjustments in and out of each bin, and based on the adjustment bins as well. So you always want to make sure your overall quantities are in sync between the two ledgers. So the last thing I do want to show in terms of the inventory process and the physical year-end process is how to reclassify an item. So let's say you have you're doing an inventory count and you realize that items are in different locations or current inventory is in different bins. What you would do is you would go to a journal called the Item Reclassification Journal. And so this reclassification journal, you can specify the item number. So for example, in this case, I'll go to this item. And if we look at the item by location, essentially, you can see, just seeing if we want to adjust anything here. What we can see is about this item is there's 75 on hand, right? But out of that 75 on hand, we have 70 in the test warehouse location, and we have 2 in the east location. So let's say within the warehouse enabled location, we want to change those bins that it's located. We want to move it to the shipping bin, or the receiving bin in this case. What we can do is we can actually go to the test warehouse location here, and we can specify, we can keep the location code the same, but we can change where the bin locations are. So let's say we move 40 of these from the receive bin. So essentially, this is not set up with directed put away and pick. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use another example here. And so the example would be the east warehouse, because we saw we had some inventory there. We can move it to a new location of the main warehouse. And we can so this is essentially the example here, like how you can adjust different locations for different items for inventory. You can also adjust for warehouse enabled locations, different bins, so specify a new bin code for that, for example. And this is where you can do your adjustments if you want to reclassify inventory. You can also reclassify inventory by lot. So in order to do that, you can do that if you have warehouse tracked items. You can go to the line item tracking lines here. So right now this doesn't have an item tracking code and my inventory is not lot tracked. So if it was lot tracked, it would bring up the item tracking lines, and that's where you could specify a new lot creation. This is a very advanced functionality, and this is kind of when you want to do inventory reclassifications when you have multiple items that need to be reclassified per location. This is when you would use this functionality. So that's pretty much what I had today, and I'll hand it over to Tess for the question. Thank you, guys.
Great, thank you, Will. So if anyone has any questions, please type them into the questions area of the control panel. We'll give a minute or two to do that. So thanks, Will.
My pleasure.
I don't see any questions coming in yet. All right, I think we can end a little bit early today, Will. There's no questions that have come in, and so thank you for sharing that information today, and thank you to everyone for joining us today. I hope everyone has a great rest of your day.
Thank you.